And just a disclaimer, everything I say is my opinion. Wasn't approved by Ben or the church or anybody else, so all complaints have to come to me. I'm online, my email's easy to find. I'm going to start out with this verse. I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had two horns like a lamb and spoke like a dragon. We're going to get to that. And I'm going to show you why I personally believe that it's important. But to start out our Religious Liberty Day today, my plan is to go as follows. I'd like to show you what's happening in the world. I'd link it back to the Bible. I have a video. I know all of you will appreciate that. Then I'd like to discuss some of the things that are happening here in our country and finish up with some of the individual cases that I am aware of that I'd like to bring to your attention. Let's all bow our heads for a brief moment of prayer. Jesus, this subject can be fairly complex at times. It certainly affects all of our lives. Please help us to understand it. Help me to present it in a manageable form. I ask you this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so in religious liberty, we'll start out with the 10 worst countries. First of all, I'm just thrilled to death we're not on that list, and I'll show you why later. But the interesting point of this list is North Korea has been number one for 16 years. They're not number one anymore. They were the worst religious liberty, how will I put it, the worst fiend of religious liberty? Imprisonment or death for just possessing a Bible. You pick one up, somebody sees you in North Korea, I can just kill you, it's over. They're not number one anymore. Now, I don't know if that surprises most of you. I'm surprised, I suspect it probably surprises Mr. Kim over there that he managed to be bumped off number one. But he's no longer number one. Number one is now Afghanistan under the Taliban. Interestingly enough, the top 10 really bad countries for religious liberty haven't changed. They just keep shuffling places. North Korea got bumped down to number 2. Somalia has held steady at number 3. Libya is steady at number 4. Yemen rose 2 spots. They've moved up to number 5. Eritrea is held steady at number 6. Now, the next one, Nigeria, rose 2 spots to number 7. First of all, I hope that this next bit of information gives you a flavor for how bad religious liberty is out there, okay? Nigeria is number 7, okay? They are number 1 for Christian martyrs. They host 79% of the total. Everybody else combined can't even get close. So 79% of the Christian martyrs on the planet Earth it's happening in Nigeria, and they're only at number 7. I'm waiting to let that sink in. 79% of the Christian deaths in the entire planet are happening in the number 7 country for religious persecution. Pakistan fell 3 spots to number 8. Iran fell 1 spot to number 9. India held solid at number 10. And I mentioned number 11 just to give us kind of a taste. Saudi Arabia is number 11. It is illegal to publicly practice any faith other than the state's official religion of Sunni Islam. Members of other faiths are allowed to worship privately. That may not even include a husband and wife. But non-Muslim houses of worship may not be built. That's number 11. An interesting case just on our world stage is that the number 2 country for happiness is Denmark. Number 1 is Finland. In the number 2 country for happiness, their Supreme Court just ruled that firing an Adventist high school teacher was justified after he refused to participate in an open house event held on Sabbath. So, it may be the number 2 place for happiness on earth, but perhaps not if you want to keep the Sabbath. So, interestingly enough, most of my facts this morning for Afghanistan come from the USA State Department 2021 Country Report on the Human Rights Practices, and I'm picking on Afghanistan only to show you how bad it is and how lucky you and I are. Now, I'll show you later on how we can be unlucky pretty quickly, but that's in a few minutes. In this particular case of Afghanistan, and this again is according to our United States State Department, and by the way, they have, I don't know exactly how to put it other than to say they have smoothed over a lot of the worst things to put in their report. So they mention them, but they don't get the factual violence that are found in some of the other reports that you can find out there. Christians and Muslims reported that they worship only and privately in small group, and that's Muslims who don't belong to the main religion, the approved religion. That is in home or nondescript places of worship, mostly to avoid discrimination and persecution. Individuals converting from Islam are still risk complete annulment of marriages, reduction by family communities, and generally loss of employment. And if you're lucky, you get those because the next thing is the death penalty. Christian converts are considered apostates and subject to execution immediately under the Sharia law. I don't need a lot of long, flowery lawyers involved in this type of thing, which is certainly offensive personally. But you'll understand how Christian converts are upset about that, because the next one is a problem for Christian parents. Because if you're a Christian family, many people in the Muslim community, in some of these small military groups, threaten to kidnap Christian daughters and marry them off to the Taliban. Now, the reason is that's how they handle it, and you'll see why here. In this specific case, some Taliban gunmen entered a women's shelter in Kabul by force. They interrogated the staff and residents for a number of hours. They forced the leader of the head of the shelter to sign some documents, the usual stuff. And then they decided how they're going to handle everything. The Taliban told the shelter operator that the married shelter residents would return to their homes, whether they were, this was a domestic violence shelter, which, by the way, there is no domestic violence in Afghanistan. That is just how your house shakes out, literally. So the married shelter residents would be sent back to their husbands. The female shelter residents, however, are being raffled off to Taliban soldiers. They will be marrying various Taliban soldiers. So you can imagine how much choice the women have. That's not really unusual there. In another district, a Taliban commander decided to kill a 16-year-old girl when her family refused to allow her to marry a Taliban soldier who she was ordered to marry. A Taliban fighter basically threatened to kill a widowed mother and her 5 children if she didn't marry him. And there's no exact notice of exactly how she became a widow, whether it was moments before or now. But the reality was she made the choice to marry. Now, once she has chosen to marry, she no longer has the option of divorce, because divorce can only be granted by a man, and even a mullah, who is their leader, spiritual leader, can't grant a divorce unless the husband says, yes, I'd like one. So she's stuck in her new marriage because she consented, and she said basically her life is a complete nightmare. That's probably true. However, her life and the life of her 5 children were spared. To show you what kind of things happened, the Taliban closed the Ministry for Women's Affairs and announced that they were opening it as the Ministry for Propagation of Virtue and Prevention of Vice. Their meetings have basically said that their enforced degrees on gender segregation, women's dress, head covering, unaccompanied women, and music. Playing music is forbidden, and businesses owned by religious minorities would be subject to restrictions on hours of operation and merchandise for sale. And no women may own a business, although they did previously. Currently, there's no way they can own a business. Now, there's no education of girls. I have two girls, and both of them have graduated from at least college, and the problem is that if you're in Afghanistan and you're a girl, your educational opportunities are nil. Now, that's not the official position. However, we have explosions at girls' schools, we have burning down girls' schools, we have refusing to pay the teachers for girls' schools, which, by the way, have to be women and have to pass some Taliban standards. So the reality is, after this takeover, the Taliban has restricted or prohibited outright female education against all age levels. So essentially, that has moved to number one. And my concerted opinion of why that is because North Korea prohibits everything, but they haven't singled out women the way Afghanistan has for punishment or repression. In North Korea, everybody's repressed. But in Afghanistan, we're specifically picking on 50% of the population, in addition to anyone who's not of the majority religion. And that has moved us up to number one. Now, I have a lot of more facts about that, and frankly, they're so depressing, I'm not going to present them. So, Kevin, could you play the video, please?
In 1776, we were fighting for independence. And even then, it was already clear that we were fighting for much more, a new kind of nation. For almost 170 years, the government of Virginia had been closely intertwined with the Anglican Church. But as the war went on, Virginia began to take the first steps toward another kind of revolution, religious freedom. George Mason drafted the Virginia Declaration of Rights in June 1776. It would deeply influence both the Declaration of Independence and the Bill of Rights. Mason's first draft included a clause that guaranteed toleration of all religious creeds.
All men should enjoy the fullest toleration in the exercise of religion, unpunished and unrestrained. George Mason.
It was a giant step forward, but for James Madison, not enough. The small, frail boy who'd been moved by a sermon from jail was now a small, frail man with weak nerves and a squeaky voice. He was once described as a man no bigger than a half piece of soap. But Madison was an incisive thinker who prepared with incredible thoroughness, and a voracious student who was passionate about religious freedom.
What he got out of his readings was a firm belief that he carried through life, that it was the individual's pursuit of religion, that it was not doctrine that had to be spoon-fed you, that you needed to read Scripture and come up with your own interpretations and be a church unto yourself.
As a young lawyer, he defended Baptist preachers arrested for preaching without a license from the Anglican Church. For Madison, the idea that the government could tolerate various beliefs was not sufficient, nor was the idea new. In 1689, the English Parliament had passed the Act of Toleration, granting freedom of worship to Protestants alone, and dissenters like the Puritans had to register with the Church. Toleration presupposed that there was a dominant church willing to let the others exist.
Toleration was a very different thing from religious liberty. It took a long time for a true understanding of liberty to develop.
There was a Goethe who said that toleration is an insult, because when toleration is granted, it can always be withdrawn.
So the quiet Madison helped Mason rewrite Virginia's Declaration of Rights. It was now quite different.
Religion can be directed only by reason and conviction, not by force or violence. And therefore, all men are equally entitled to the free exercise of religion according to the dictates of conscience. James Madison.
The great challenge to the American founders, the great experiment that they undertook, was to see if it would be possible, as the first Federalist paper said, to create a government based on reflection and choice, rather than on accident and force.
Toleration had become freedom. Yet the amended Declaration of Rights also suggested that the government depended on Christian virtues.
It is the mutual duty of all to practice Christian forbearance, love, and charity towards each other. James Madison.
Madison's friend and fellow Virginian, Thomas Jefferson, still wasn't satisfied.
He was a legislator in Virginia when he authored a bill for establishing religious freedom. Its main point was quite simple. All men shall be free to profess and by argument to maintain their opinions in matters of religion.
When Jefferson was appointed minister to France, he took care to pack ample copies of his bill for religious freedom. The great thinkers of Europe had created the theory of man's natural rights of man, but it took the new American spirit to put those ideas into the language of law. But Jefferson's bill was not yet a law. In Virginia, the bill stalled in the legislature.
I kind of submit to you that we've gone backwards, and now we have toleration. And I think I'm going to be able to back that up. Kevin, you got Revelation 17:15? I can't see if it's up or not, but anyway, Revelation 17:15 says, "And he says to me, the waters which thou sawest, where the horse sitteth, are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues." So the Bible has gone ahead and defined the waters in regards to a number of beasts. Now Revelation 13:11, please, Kevin. This beast is different. The beast in Revelation 13:11 comes out of the land. Now we know that the waters are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. The Bible does not define the land. "And I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth, had two horns like a lamb, and spoke as a dragon." I submit to you that this is a sparsely populated area. That's the earth. The water is very populated. The earth then would be sparsely populated. In order to have a country that comes out of that, there are only four. There's America, there's Canada, there is Australia, and there's New Zealand. All of the other three, other than the United States, are different. They were founded on economic principles for economy, for furs, for trade, for whaling. They're also all parts of the English monarchy. Okay? The Queen is still on their money. The reality is the only one that was founded differently is the United States. It was founded by the Puritans who came over for religious freedom. Plus the idea that at the end of time, the United States would not be mentioned by the Bible. What, did God forget us? Considered the superpower on the planet for the last 100 years. Still at least acknowledge the greatest superpower, if not still. Russia's down, China is our only main competitor, but they didn't mention us. I don't think that that analysis holds water. Therefore, the United States is this beast. Not to mention, of course, the lamb-like horn, allegedly by some, is the buffalo. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. We don't know, but it's certainly a woolly creature with two big horns. The other thing, like I said, there's no crowns, therefore there's no monarchy. Again, I think that shows the United States. The only way this nation, our nation, can speak as a dragon is the way the dragon does things, and it says the dragon was wroth and went to make war with the remnant or seed. That's Revelation 12:17. So the only way this beast, our country, can become that beast is to make war. And ladies and gentlemen, that happened in our lifetime in the year 2020. Now, any of you who don't think we were tolerated, all you got to do is read the paper about Tampa, okay? So in 2020, this church and many others were closed for months, ladies and gentlemen. This one was approximately 3 to 4 months. Now, I'm not saying that the pastor at the time didn't try and do things online and lots of other things, but if you came here to worship, the doors were locked. In free religious America. Oh, it wasn't just our church. It was every church in 50 states, other than the few churches that refused to do what they were told. One of them who got their pastor arrested was up in Tampa. We're not doing it. We'll wear masks, we'll do whatever. Some of us will, some of us won't. We don't care. We're not stopping. All right? Well, that wasn't tolerated too well because that pastor got arrested and he was prosecuted partially until the case was dropped when our governor decided that religion was important. And by the way, why did the state have to say that religion was important? But they did. So he's off. I'm going to pick on the two worst states. The worst state that I've already told you is Maine. That's Governor Janet Mills. She prohibited all religious gatherings, everything. Now, an interesting point is she prohibited gatherings in parking lots. Now, first of all, let me talk about Maine, okay? This is winter, okay? This is not a bunch of people sitting around in shorts and Hawaiian shirts with their flip-flops on and their convertibles with their tops down talking to their neighbor, okay? We can all agree with that. This is Maine. We're shivering in our fully clothed, every bit of clothing we can put on if we're rolling down our windows, and really we're not doing that because all we have to do is turn to our AM transmitter, and essentially, with our windows closed, we are having church in a group in a parking lot. You may not do that. Now, they weren't the only state to do it. The big one that made the news, by the way, this one really didn't make the news, was Kentucky when they wanted to have Easter services, okay? They're doing it outdoors at a drive-in theater. They're separating people by parking spaces. That means everybody has to be separated by at least 1 or 2 parking spaces. And we're listening, and then every hour we rotate. Kentucky went so far as they assigned state police officers to write down the license plate numbers of people who went to that service so they could be prosecuted later. Okay. I submit to you that's not a freedom. That sounds a lot like toleration, and we're not tolerating it. That's my opinion. According to the governor, after she was sued in court, she said, at some point in the future, she would allow very limited worship, but only after churches applied with the state to reopen, were approved by the state to reopen, and displayed a badge on the outside of the building, signified that it had the state's approval to be open. That's 2 years ago in one of our 50 states. That sounds like toleration to me. And frankly, it sounds a little bit like having to wear those bright yellow Star of Davids in World War II, to me. That's why I gave my disclaimer before. These are my opinions. The point is, I find that way, way, way offensive. And additionally, for the record, she made no bones about the fact that if you were, in fact, one of the churches did, they participated in a lot of, I guess you would call them, civilian ministries that were not related to church. And any one of those ministries, food ministries or any other, they were all allowed until they opened a Bible. At that point in time, they became a religious gathering and they were prohibited in Maine. I find that to be toleration, not a freedom. Part of their lawsuit said the challenge order said that houses of worship can hold secular but not religious activities. They specifically used those words. If we were holding a secular activity here in Maine, we would be totally okay. If I opened the Bible, or one of you did it, now we're toast. Now, is that a freedom, or is that toleration? Now, just because it's not the federal government doesn't mean that the lamb-like beast didn't speak as a dragon. I have to be approved. I have to post a badge on the outside of the building saying that I can worship here. So, anyway, I think that's the worst one. Colorado was close. Colorado, the problem was, especially in this particular case, Teller County, we have 12 casinos. 11 of them are open 24 hours a day. We really don't care how much you have in your casino because assuming we make $1 a person and we do 10,000 people an hour, and that's 24 hours and times so many days, you can see how many millions we add up. However, as it turns out, there's a Christian college in that county. And that poor Christian college, I wanted to get the name, the Charis Bible College. They can hold 5,000 people comfortably. They were limited to 175 people, separated by as much room as possible, and that's all the government would allow them to have in their facilities. They don't pay taxes. They don't make them over $1 million a day. It sounds like toleration to me. You may not do that because you're not paying a bunch of money. I think that's bad. I think the lamb-like beast, we saw it. I think any of us who are sitting in our pews and thinking, you know, Mr. Price probably doesn't know what he's talking about, which I'm okay with, the reality is it's clear from the Bible, and it's clear from our lives. In our lifetime, the United States is the lamb-like beast, and it has literally spoken like a dragon, assuming the dragon is picking on worship in all 50 states. It happened all at once. And I'm telling you, if you go back and look, you'll see that there are very few protests. Most of us just said, oh, well, that's okay. That's the government. Really? Because they won't tolerate our religion? Now, the good news is they didn't tolerate any religion. It didn't matter whether you're Christian or Jewish or Muslim or Seventh-day Adventist or Pentecostal. We're not tolerating any of you. I don't know that that makes me feel better or worse. In 2022, the Supreme Court took up the battle, the case of Shurtleff versus Boston. No relation, by the way, to our pastor. There was an issue where Boston has a flagpole. And in this flagpole, any group who wants to can file a request, and for a particular day that they have a reason, they can fly a flag. So this group was a Christian community group, and they decided to fly a flag on a particular date, and they petitioned, and Boston said no. They said, we're not going to allow religious flags in a public forum. It's interesting that this is one of the few cases where the United States Supreme Court 9-0 said, oh, yes, you are. This is America. And the city of Boston violated the Constitution by censoring a private flag in a public forum open to all applicants merely because the application referred to it as a Christian flag. The High Court wrote that Boston did not make the raising of and flying of private group flags a form of government speech. It says that Boston's refusal to let the Shurtleff people and raise their flag based on its religious viewpoint, abridged their freedom of speech and violated the Constitution. The Supreme Court also came out with Kennedy versus Bremerton. Now, this was a particular coach that used to pray on the 50-yard line after games. And they said, no, you can't do that. And he said, well, let's see. And again, the opinion was written. It says, respect for religious expressions is indispensable to life in a free and diverse republic. Here, a government entity sought to punish an individual for engaging in a brief, quiet, personal religious observance, doubly protected by the Free Exercise Clause of religion and the Free Speech Clauses of the First Amendment. Nope, can't do that either. And the last one happened just about the time that COVID was upon us, and that is Espinoza versus Montana. Now, this one's only 5-4, okay? But basically, they said that the Institute for Justice violated the Free Exercise Clause by excluding religious schools from a tuition assistance program. Basically, the idea is very similar to Florida's. We're going to pay you, and you can pick the school. And they said, okay, we pick a religious school. And they said, well, that's not one of the schools you can pick. And the Supreme Court said, look, you're giving the parents money to pick a private school. They can pick whatever private school they want. You're not discriminating or you're not advancing religion by paying the parents to put their child in a private school, but they get to pick the school. And if you don't let them pick the school, that's violating their rights, not yours. Okay? Now, another interesting case when we start to get to personal cases, we have an elementary school in the Frenchtown Elementary School District, and that's in New Jersey. And this little 8-year-old girl, of course, she has to tell them what song she's going to sing in the after-school talent show. And she picks a Christian song, which caused the New Jersey School District to run around like their hair was on fire. Okay, because we are in a panic. So what we got to do is we immediately got to lock this little 8-year-old girl down, and she can't be doing this. All right. So that's exactly what they decided to do. That the song was overtly religious, and permitting the song would have violated the Establishment Clause because we're bringing religion into our private school. Now, what's interesting in this case is the government filed a brief, which means they filed a little research paper that says, we think the school's out of bounds. We support the little 8-year-old girl. And the court felt that they were also agreeing. The song, by the way, was Awesome God. It was not. They held that the school's censorship, and that's what they called it, of Awesome God constituted unlawful viewpoint discrimination because the song conformed to the talent show guidelines in all respects, and the school permitted other acts with religious content. The court further ruled that the school's establishment concerns did not justify censoring the little girl's song. What that means is she wins. She gets to sing. The other school district we'll talk about next is the Tri-Creek in Indiana. This one I just find supremely annoying. If you want to take off for religious observance and you're a parent, you're allowed 1 day. Just one. You've got 220 days where you're in school, you get 1 day. Just one. No more than one. If you try and take more than one, your child is penalized in the following ways. They can't make up any homework. It's an unexcused absence. They can be docked a grade. They can fail the entire class because you took out more than 1 day. So a parent decided, I'm taking my kid out. And she was part of the United Church of God, and her child was given 8 unexcused absences for documented religious attendance. The teachers failed to allow them to make up work and followed the policy exactly. They were not allowing to make up classwork, and he could suffer expulsion. Okay, that was the threat. Whether that was the threat and 9 or 10 absences, that is the threat. And additionally, they alleged that the mother was clearly neglecting her child, and the Department of Children and Family Services was given a referral for her neglect. The court found that Tri-Creek's attendance policy violated both Mrs. S. and her son's right to exercise their religion freely and Mrs. S's right to raise her child consistent with her religious beliefs. The settlement that was reached was absences for religious services will now be recorded as excused. Credit will be given for timely made-up work, and the child automatically gets the opportunity to make up that work. And school attendance policies will be revised to accommodate all religious observances. That's their settlement. Now, we don't know what the court would have agreed to, but we know that the school district decided to give that once they heard the initial judge's rulings on some of the initial stuff. So they basically fled and said, okay, we were wrong. And they were. And they would have lost. So since they gave the play everything they wanted, problem solved. Funding is another issue. We got 2 or 3 funding cases where the after-school groups that were Christians were charged fees for using school services that other groups, like the Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts and some of these other groups, the chess club, were not charged. And the court said, no. Everybody gets charged or nobody gets charged, but you don't get to charge religious groups just because you think that you're monitoring what they're doing. That's not allowed. And the last one is Westfield Public Schools. This group had given away literature for years, but all of a sudden they changed their literature, and rather than giving away literature to save the whales or whatever, they decided to give away literature containing a religious message. And basically, once they did that, the school said, no, you're not allowed to do that, prohibited any more expression, and the court said, no. You may not prohibit the students' club from distributing literature to fellow students during non-instructional time based on the content of the literature. This is America. It's not tolerating their speech. They get it. It's a right, and they can do it. Now, I argue to you that the reason our religious freedom is under attack is that verse. It's under attack everywhere. And frankly, we have very little suffering. And you want to see some suffering, go read the State Department report and start with Afghanistan. I'm pretty sure you won't get through North Korea before you figure out, man, we got it great here. Because we do. Okay? But great is not perfect. Great is not perfect when, yes, we have it great, but it's not toleration. I don't get to worship here because the government tolerates it, because there's a sign on the door that says the government has approved this house of worship, and they've stamped it, and I get to wear a little badge that says I can come to church because I meet the government requirements. That is not the law. That's not to say that there aren't states like Maine that would like to make that the law, but currently that's not the law. It is not toleration. I can worship here because I can worship here, because I've got a right to worship here, and the government has no right to tell me no. However, 2020, they told us no. I don't remember any picketing. I don't remember anybody out in the parking lot having church. I don't remember that. Now, and I'll tell you what, we have no excuse. If those people in the winter in Maine can go out in their cars and risk worshiping, windows down or closed, we have no excuse in our Hawaiian shirts, shorts, okay, and occasional hats because the sun gets hot, okay? We have no excuse why we weren't in our parking lot 6 feet apart having church. Now, I wasn't the leader. The leader chose to do it online, and that's his choice. But that doesn't mean that some of us shouldn't have brought to the attention of the then pastor. It's like, Pastor, online is nice. And plenty of churches did it online, okay? But what about some of us that, I don't know, I gotta admit, I don't feel very close to you folk when I'm online. It's just not me, okay? I'll play video games with my grandson occasionally, and I'm like, okay, we can talk, but it's not like, we're not that close. And all of us online with microphones, maybe I'd feel closer. Brent could say something mean to me, and I could say something mean back to him, and we'd be okay, right? But we didn't have that. And frankly, we were asleep at the switch, okay? And for the record, we had warning. We have warning. It's coming back. Do we have a plan to meet in the parking lot? Well, right now we're going through the tridemic. So we got the new COVID, we got the flu, and we got something else, and it's all coming, and it's supposed to. Do you really? We're making it, I guess. It's January. We haven't gotten too many new rules. Okay? But if the new rules happen, are we going to close our doors again? Are we going to say, okay, the government can do that? The government can speak against religion? Are we going to go down and apply to reopen and have the government give us a little stamp on the door, and each one of us will get a tag that says we're approved? And then we can come like we're on some cruise, and if we don't get approved, we can't come to church? Now, is that a right, or are we tolerated? I think it's clear that we've gone from a right to toleration. And for the record, it's happened so quietly and stealthily that we didn't even know. We didn't realize that we've gone from having a right to being tolerated. It's okay. We'll let you worship if you follow these steps. What? Ladies and gentlemen, we should be outraged. I understand, but the Bible said it's coming. The Bible said that the lamb-like beast, that's us, the United States, is going to speak as a dragon. Okay, we're going to have to live through that, okay? But we don't have to sleep through it. Okay? It happened once in 2020. Can we all admit that's a dry run, and can we prepare for the next one? And by the way, part of our preparation should be, hey, where are we going to meet when they close our doors again? They're going to close our doors again. Where are we going to meet? We're going to meet in the parking lot? We're going to, Even in Saudi Arabia, number 11, Christians can meet in people's homes. And by the way, in California, they rejected that for people more than 10. Now, eventually that went to the Supreme Court and was overturned, but the point is, California said, no, you can't even do that. More than 10 people in a person's home is a misdemeanor, it's a crime, and we're going to prosecute you. So anybody who thinks that, oh, it's okay, we'll just do home church, maybe not. Maybe they'll tolerate home church. Maybe they'll tolerate what you want to do. Maybe. Let's all bow our heads. Father, this is tough stuff. Revelation 13:11 has happened in front of our eyes, and we may not have understood it. We may have missed it totally. And help us to understand that our religious liberty could be in trouble just as much as the poor folks in Afghanistan and North Korea. We'd ask that you be with us and help us to stand at the time of the end. Amen.